or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hi, this is Sally Herzog, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the Friday, May 15, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Tsai gives Trump warning on Taiwan. Remark about peril of a clash highlights tensions despite leaders' cordial talks. Chinese leader Xi Jinping warned President Trump that any mishandling of Taiwan could lead to an extremely dangerous situation, directly raising a point of tension that has loomed over what the U.S. president said at the start could be the best summit ever. Xi's remarks, well in line with China's long-standing position, threatened to dim the mood of a visit both countries hoped would stabilize ties. The meetings that began Thursday morning at the Great Hall of the People in Beijing were billed as a gathering of superpowers to quell economic and trade disputes. Those topics were indeed raised, including discussions of trade, ties, U.S. access to the Chinese market, Beijing's investment in U.S. industries, and its purchase of U.S. agricultural products. Xi, however, aims to weaken the U.S. commitment to Taiwan, a self-governing democracy that Beijing seeks to bring under its control. Handled well, relations between the two countries can maintain overall stability, the Chinese leader said, according to the Foreign Ministry. If handled properly, the two countries will collide or even clash. If handled poorly, the two countries will collide or even clash, putting the entire U.S.-China relationship in an extremely dangerous situation. Taiwan independence and cross-strait peace are as irreconcilable as fire and water, Tsai said. Safeguarding peace and stability across the Taiwan Strait is the biggest common denominator between China and the U.S. Trump, a Republican, didn't publicly respond to Xi's statement. Great place. Incredible. China's beautiful, Trump said, following the morning discussions. When asked how the talks had gone, he didn't answer questions about Taiwan. Trump entered the meeting with a pressing issue on his hands, the war in Iran. Tehran relies on China for its economic survival, and Trump wants Xi's help in brokering an end of the war. The two leaders did discuss Iran, according to the White House official, who said China agreed that the Strait of Hormuz should remain a free waterway and agreed that Iran shouldn't have nuclear weapons. But there was no indication on the first day of the summit that China is prepared to do more. Beijing's official statement said only that the two sides exchanged views on the situation in the Middle East. China's Foreign Ministry didn't respond to a request for comment. Xi expressed some interest in increasing Chinese purchase of U.S. oil, according to the White House version of events. China made a point to raise Taiwan even after the U.S. had signaled for days that it had no plans to make substantive changes to its long-standing policy of not supporting Taiwan independence while stopping short of formally opposing it. The White House made no mention of Taiwan. Thursday, the only full day of meetings and events, began as a smiling Tsai greeted Trump with a handshake. A red carpet ceremony overlooking Tiananmen Square featured a military honor guard and flag-wearing schoolchildren. Cannons exploded over the square as the military band played the Star-Spangled Banner, and Trump saluted. One Chinese official leaned over to a reporter afterwards and asked whether Trump liked the ceremony. Business executives, including Tesla's Elon Musk and NVIDIA's Jensen Huang, along with the president's son, Eric Trump, and his wife, Lara, accompanied the U.S. government delegation. The meeting of leaders and their delegations lasted over 2 hours in the hall. Information about the meeting, including Xi's remark about Taiwan and a comment about stabilizing relations for the duration of Trump's presidency, dripped out slowly during the day, mostly from China's state media and foreign ministry. Western-based journalists traveling with the president received a brief account of the meeting hours after it concluded. Slightly more detail came from U.S. business leaders. Musk, Huang, and Tim Cook, the Apple chief executive, were spotted leaving the front entrance of the Great Hall of the People, and reporters asked how the summit had gone as they went down the stairs. "Wonderful," said Musk. Asked what had been achieved, Musk said many good things. Huang said meetings went well. Cook simply made a peace sign. Following the morning meeting, Trump and Xi proceeded to a tour of Beijing's 15th century Temple of Heaven. The leaders met again on Thursday evening for a state dinner with dignitaries and business leaders. In an opening toast, Xi said the U.S. and China should be partners rather than rivals. Trump followed by lauding his visit and inviting Xi to visit the White House on September 24th. It was unclear if the Chinese leader had accepted the offer. Both men then sat at a round table flanked by translators, officials, and members of Trump's family in an ornate Great Hall. On Friday, the two leaders will attend a tea ceremony and working lunch before Trump returns to Washington. Senate U.S. administration officials, including Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, and Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller attended the proceedings. Ahead of the summit, both countries expected to announce agreements on Chinese purchases of U.S. agricultural and aerospace products. Analysts said they expected few breakthroughs in the trade relationship, which was unsettled last year by U.S. tariffs on China and Beijing's retaliatory restrictions on rare earth exports. Trump and Xi hope a trade truce announced after a meeting in South Korea later last year can be extended in Beijing, but there had been a long-standing fear that Taiwan and the war in Iran could derail the talks. Despite the planning and choreography, there were snafus. A U.S. Secret Service agent was briefly denied entry into the temple compound with his weapon. Chinese officials at one point tried to prevent some U.S. officials from joining the president's motorcade, causing a spirited confrontation. Americans are flocking boom towns far outside major cities, data show. The future of American cities is in the excerpts. The latest Census Bureau data show that some of the fastest growing cities are often sitting in the distant orbit of a larger city and centered on booming master planned communities. Take Falls Hill, Texas, an affluent community about 35 miles west of downtown Houston. By mid-2025, it had an estimated 64,630 people, the Census Bureau said on Thursday, rocketing up from around 17,000 in 2020. No other American city with more than 50,000 people has grown faster in that span. Here are some of the other hotspots and trends from the latest census data, focusing on city populations from the 12 months running through June 2025. The Dallas area is sprinkled with fast-growing exurbs, even as the city itself, as well as some closer suburbs, lost population in the last measured year. The biggest standout is Salina, Texas, a boomtown on the metro area's far northern fringes that features master plan communities. It added nearly 13,000 people in the year through mid-2025, boosting its population to more than 64,400 people. Houston population 2.4 million added fewer people. Other fast growers in the region include Fort Worth, the nation's 10th largest city. Dallas, meanwhile, was among the top largest cities that shrunk slightly in the most recent census measured year, joining New York City and Los Angeles. The overall U.S. population grew 0.5% in that span, about half the prior year's growth, reflecting tighter immigration restrictions under both the Biden and Trump administrations. The population of Phoenix, the nation's fifth largest city, crept up 0.2% in the most recent year, but it is surrounded by much faster growing cities in its outer orbit. Places in Arizona, like Goodyear, Buckeye, Surprise, and Avondale, all have topped 100,000 residents and grew at least 4.5%. All of them outgrew Phoenix in sheer numbers. So did Queen Creek, a southeastern suburb of nearly 90,000 people that grew 8.2% in the last measured year. New England isn't like the West. Massachusetts is steadily losing more domestic movers than it is gaining, and Boston shrank slightly in the last measured year. Some of the nation's priciest real estate often means growth gets pushed out to Metro Boston's fringes. A few of the growing old industrial cities with generally cheaper housing and lengthy commutes include Manchester and Nashua. The biggest cities in no-income tax New Hampshire, Worcester, Massachusetts, grew 0.9% to nearly 214,000 in the last measured year, securing its claim as New England's second largest city. Boston does have a fast grower on its doorstep, the small city of Everett, Massachusetts, where the population rose 4.6% to more than 53,000 people in the latest measured year. The traditionally working-class city has seen a rare for the area housing surge in recent years. North Carolina remains a growth hotspot. Its famed Research Triangle Park is flanked by Raleigh and Durham, which together had 812,000 residents as of mid-2025, up 9% since 2020. They are surrounded by smaller boomtowns too, including Cary, Chapel Hill, Apex, and Holly Springs. Collectively, 8 of those communities grew 14% in the 5 years through mid-2025 to nearly 500,000 people. Charlotte, North Carolina, with a population of almost 965,000, is near joining an exclusive club with just 12 members, including Austin, Texas, a brand new entity. Cities with more than 1 million people. Charlotte grew 2.2% in the last measured year, faster than the U.S. city with more than 500,000 people. Honda posts $2.7 billion loss for the year. Deficit is carmaker's first as a listed company follows U.S. EV exit. Honda on Thursday reported its first annual loss as a listed company, equivalent to $2.7 billion, and cited electric vehicle losses equivalent to about $10 billion after giving up on its main EV plans in the U.S. Honda has canceled plans for 3 electric cars it had said it would sell in the U.S., a sport utility vehicle, a sedan, and the luxury Acura model. It also called off plans to sell EVs in a joint venture with Sony. And Chief Executive Toshiro Mibe said Thursday that Honda would indefinitely freeze plans for a Canadian project that would have included manufacturing of EVs, batteries, and materials. Mibe said he was abandoning a target he set in 2021 when he said all Honda cars would be EVs or fuel cell vehicles by 2040. We at management are taking this loss very seriously, he said. It is my biggest responsibility to build a business structure that can withstand whatever may come, and amid this uncertainty. Honda shares rose 3.8% in Tokyo Thursday. Honda's sales in China have fallen by more than half in the past 5 years, owing to intense competition, and are losing further ground this year, according to results from the first quarter. In the current fiscal year, ending March 2027, Honda expects global car sales to stay largely steady at 3.39 million, offsetting losses in China with gains in North America. Honda first listed its shares on the Tokyo Stock Exchange in 1957. The past fiscal year, which ended in March, was the first time it recorded an annual loss. Honda stock has fallen 14% year-to-date through Thursday, weighed down by concerns about the impact from the Iran war and the U.S. tariffs. Honda says its core business of selling gasoline-powered cars remains profitable, similar to other car makers, such as General Motors and Ford. They have reported EV-related write-downs. It expects to earn a net profit of more than $1.6 billion in the current fiscal year, despite expected additional EV-related write-downs. The core of the recovery plan: more hybrid gas-electric vehicles for Americans who have flocked to Toyota's hybrids. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And continuing on, a 32-mile walk around Manhattan? Sign me up. The annual Great Saunter has blown up, creating new obstacles for walkers. One island, 32 miles, 3,500 masochists. The first Saturday in May is a cherished tradition for die-hard walkers who gather to circumvent Manhattan in one very long day. But lately the event has been almost unrecognizable to veterans of the 40-year-old stroll. A surge of interest from young people has made just gaining entry a chore. As recently as 2013, fewer than 1,000 people registered for the event. Organizers capped this year's saunter at 3,500, and another 3,000 landed on the wait list. The start was moved from tavern to a pavilion. Some walkers carried jingling shells to mark their previous participation in another very long walk, the Camino de Santiago. A few sported hiking poles, others wore jeans and carried tote bags. Unregistered stragglers joined the line throughout the day, while other people peeled away. Crowds winded through greenway and walking trails, processing through thin paths in single-file lines and dodging annoyed runners and whizzing bikers. There were 30-minute lines for park bathrooms along the route. Shore Walkers, the nonprofit that organizes the walk, attributes the recent spike in interest to what else? Social media. There were a couple TikToks, and all of a sudden we just started getting slammed and selling out in a few hours, said President Pam Cross. Organizers estimate more than one-third of this year's walkers were between the ages of 18 and 34, compared to 19% in 2022. Sarah Milstein, 57, has participated at least a dozen times. For a long time, she said, it was more of a middle-aged scene. The writer and leadership coach seemed more philosophical than annoyed about the influx of 20-somethings. Milstein said the Saunters is now part of New York's line culture, where young people flock to spots hyped on social media and expect to encounter endless quays. Gen Z and millennial walkers said they're seeking in-person connection and community after the pandemic. Amy Zayang, who sauntered last year, was a college freshman in 2020 and spent much of her undergraduate career socially distancing. People her age said crave something real. Gizong joked that she was following the first commandment of going analog, touch grass. Some newcomers are finding out the hard way that the Great Saunter is no leisurely stroll. The event starts between 7 a.m. and 8 a.m., and it takes most walkers between 10 and 12 hours to complete. Rachel Morris, 27, entered last year's Saunter after moving to Brooklyn from Albany. 8 hours into the walk, she started to succumb to an electrolyte deficit. Every step kind of became torture, said Morris. But enough time passed to convince her to try again. This year, she took more breaks, finishing in 14 hours. Matthew Barak and Kate Berg, both 32, did their maiden saunter in 2024. As they passed the little red lighthouse under the George Washington Bridge, he proposed. Hoping to make it a tradition, they signed up again this year, only to land on the wait list. Baroque said he added the proposal to the notes field to get in and did their first walk as a married couple. Organizers said they try to find a balance between longtime walkers and new registrants. Kress reminds repeat saunters that unlike in years past, they need to act fast to get a bib. They're competing with Gen Zers, who are used to the blink and you'll miss it fervor of Ticketmaster quays. Kress said the increase in interest helps advance the nonprofit mission of expanding public access to the shoreline. There are other upsides. Traveling south on Manhattan's east side requires twists and turns, and more walkers means it's harder to get lost when crowds thin. Organizers said the finish rate has gone up to around 62%, compared to about 50% in past years. John Mulligan, 76, walked this year's for the first time, along with teammates from his Rhode Island Rowing Club. The group of four, ages 59 to 76, finished in about 13 hours. Mulligan considered the aches, pains, and blisters a small price for the mingled sensation of camaraderie, achievement, and wonder at Manhattan's astonishing array of sights. Cuba says fuel has run out. Extensive blackouts, collapsing economy trigger unrest amid dwindling reserves. Cuba's government said the country has completely run out of fuel oil and diesel needed to keep the lights on, with extensive blackouts sparking protests for the third day in a row this week. Energy Minister Vincent Dall'Olevy said the island has run out of fuel reserves as a result of an ironclad energy blockade imposed by the U.S. We have absolutely no fuel oil. We have absolutely no diesel. he said on Wednesday. More than a dozen neighborhoods in the capital city of Havana erupted in protest Wednesday night, with residents hanging pots and burning garbage amid rising anger, or banging pots and burning garbage amid rising anger over days-long blackouts and deteriorating living conditions. We are back in the Stone Age, independent journalist Ioani Sanchez said in a broadcast on Thursday. She said her neighborhood in central Havana had been without electricity for some 20 hours, and her building, which depends on electricity to power pumps, had had no water for 3 days, putting elderly residents at risk. Cuba produces about 40,000 barrels a day of crude, far short of the 100,000 barrels needed to cover its daily energy needs. Fuel imports largely stopped after the Trump administration imposed a blockade on the island in January by threatening to place tariffs on the country selling oil to the island. Since then, Cuba's economy has ground to a halt amid recurring prolonged blackouts and gasoline shortages. Fuel rationing has led to public transport cuts and school closures. Basic goods are hard to find because fuel shortages affect production and distribution. Cuban President Miguel Diaz-Canel on Wednesday acknowledged deterioration of the island's electricity grid, which has become particularly tense in recent days. This dramatic worsening has a single cause: the genocidal energy blockade imposed on our country by the U.S., he wrote on X. Since January, only one shipment of Russian crude has reached Cuban ports, and the fuel refined from it has been used, Della Levy said. Blackouts are also frequent because most Cuban power plants have been in operation for about 4 decades without proper maintenance and investment. The government is insolvent and unable to upgrade its obsolete power grid. The Trump administration said it continues to seek meaningful overhauls to Cuba's communist system. Officials from the two countries have held talks in recent months about Cuba's future amid threats from President Trump. Secretary of State Marco Rubio offered $100 million in humanitarian aid to be distributed by the Catholic Church and free satellite internet service for Cubans. The regime refuses to allow the United States to provide this assistance to the Cuban people, the State Department said on Wednesday. Cuba's Foreign Minister, Bruno Rodriguez, responded that Cuba was willing to work with the Catholic Church and was ready to hear the U.S. offer, of which it had no details as of yet. Senators vote to suspend their pay in the event of a government shutdown. Republican and Democrat senators unanimously adopted a resolution to suspend their pay during future government shutdowns, a measure designed to put more pressure on lawmakers to fund federal departments on time after record-setting lapses in the past year. Senator John Kennedy introduced a resolution which passed the Senate on Thursday by a voice vote. The measure only applies to members of the Senate and doesn't need to be passed by the House or signed by the President. Lawmakers had drawn criticism in recent shutdown for continuing to draw salaries, while hundreds of thousands of federal employees were furloughed or working without pay. The resolution stops the paychecks if Congress fails to provide funds for a federal agency or department. A senator wouldn't lose pay, as the money would be put in an escrow account until the shutdown ends. Funds would be withheld by the Secretary of the Senate and released as soon as practical when the funding lapse ends. Rank-and-file senators make $174,000 a year, and leaders earn $193,400 a year. Kennedy said he wished the resolution had gone further. If it were up to me alone, I would say you forfeit your money. And by the way, you can't leave Washington, he said. Then we wouldn't have any more shutdowns. The rule puts senators in the same boat as a federal worker who aren't paid when funding lapses. Employees typically are given back pay when funding is restored. During the recent funding lapse at the Department of Homeland Security, the Trump administration shifted other money to pay airport security workers and other employees during the standoff in Congress. The office of House Speaker Mike Johnson didn't respond to a request for comment on whether the House had similar plans. The new rule will take effect after this year's midterm elections. Kennedy said the resolution couldn't take effect sooner because the Constitution restricts congressional pay from being adjusted in the current term. Kennedy previously tried to pass the resolution via unanimous consent amid the DHS shutdown in March, but was blocked by Democrats. The resolution comes after a 76-day shutdown of DHS that ended when Congress approved funding for operations, including the Coast Guard, Federal Emergency Management Agency, and Transportation Security Administration, but not for DHS's immigration enforcement arms. Democrats refused to fund Immigration and Custom Enforcement and Border Patrol unless changes to the agency's practices are made, following 2 immigration enforcement-related deaths in Minneapolis earlier this year. Republicans are now moving to finish this month a separate measure that just funds ICE and Border Patrol, using a process that could allow them to bypass Democratic opposition. Kennedy first introduced the measure in November during the 43-day government shutdown, sparked by Democrats who opposed letting Enhanced Affordable Care Act subsidies expire. Before we move on, we'd like to tell you you're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And we continue on. The tech jobs that are safe from AI for now. It should be a tough time to be a software engineer. Coding is a favorite early artificial intelligence use case, and layoffs are spreading through the tech industry. But job postings in the information technology and computer science sector are up, and recruiters say companies are hiring again. The catch? They're looking for those at mid and senior levels and other top-tier technical talent who can harness the new powers of AI. One experienced engineer can have an output of a whole team, said Chris Abbas, chief executive of recruiting firm Talentful, which works with high-growth tech companies. It's not necessarily about the amount of people they have. It's who they have and where they have them. IT and computer science job postings are up 14.2% over the year in April 2026, according to online employment marketplace ZipRecruiter. But there is a split in the demand. The share of entry-level job postings in the tech sector has fallen from 8.1% a year ago to 7.4% in April. The share of senior-level job postings, meanwhile, climbed to 43.1% from 38.8%. Cloudflare. Last week was the latest tech company to announce a wave of job cuts as part of an AI restructuring plan. The move followed earlier layoffs at Meta Platforms and Coinbase. Block. Jack Dorsey's payments company laid off 40% of its workforce. in February, alluding to AI tools. Abbas says a lot of mid-level managers are being laid off, but companies are still looking for more experienced engineers to work as individual contributors. Because AI still makes a lot of coding errors, they can serve as quality assurance. Plus, they can manage a team of AI agents, in theory, boosting productivity. Demand for other technical roles is bubbling up too, he adds, including in AI operations and AI maintenance. Employers also are hiring solutions engineers who implement AI and act as technical consultants. To Abbas, a clear sign the labor market is improving is when people start trying to poach his own recruiters, and that has been happening as of late. It's an interesting paradox, said Andy Challenger, Chief Revenue Officer at outplacement firm Challenger, Gray, and Christmas. People can use artificial intelligence to build programs and connect different parts of your company and do all of these services with the help of AI coding, and it's higher demand than ever because they can do so much so quickly. Aaron Levine, CEO of the cloud service provider Box, says he sees some tech companies hiring more engineers while others are reducing their workforces. But among Box customers, which span a variety of industries, he is seeing demand for new types of technical roles. AI is quite complicated to implement, he says. You can be sure that every bank, every pharmaceutical company, every healthcare company, every manufacturer is going to be hiring a ton of people to go implement agents. He recently wrote on X about a new role on the rise, one he is currently hiring for internally, someone who can wire up AI systems throughout a company's technical infrastructure. In some cases, this person may understand the business process well enough to do it fully, but in most cases, I expect them to work with the business directly in an embedded fashion, he wrote. Preliminary ZipRecruiter research shows that when it comes to roles that require AI expertise, companies are emphasizing a need for soft skills like communication and collaboration, says Nicole Backert, ZipRecruiter's labor economist. As AI handles background tasks, the core function of these technology roles are becoming more interpersonal and human-focused, she added. Engineers without AI-specific skills are still struggling to find work, even if they have got many years of overall experience, according to Victor Genelatis, CEO of IT employment consulting firm Janco Associates. Many of the unemployed people with tech experience tend to be legacy individuals or people getting close to retirement age, he says. The few people that are being hired are people that have done something in AI before and have a proven track record. That said, he does expect the IT job market to grow for the first time since the post-COVID slump if the Iran conflict ends by August. At least one major player is bucking this trend. Amazon Web Services CEO Matt Garman recently said Amazon would be bringing on 11,000 software engineering interns and early career employees in 2026, in keeping with previous years. The remarks were earlier reported by Business Insider. This is despite the company's shedding 16,000 jobs in January. We still need humans, said Kim Majerus, an AWS Vice President of Global Education. The 11,000 developers that we're hiring across the company are going to continue to help us enhance what we're doing today. AT&T, T-Mobile, and Verizon team up to expand U.S. cell phone coverage. AT&T, T-Mobile, U.S., and Verizon Communications are teaming up to boost coverage and connectivity in remote regions across the country. The companies, which have been locked in an intense battle to win over customers, are setting aside their differences and forming a joint venture, they said, Thursday, with help end wireless dead zones across the U.S., especially in rural and underserved areas. In the joint venture, the cell carriers said they will use satellite-based technologies to address coverage gaps by pooling limited spectrum resources to increase capacity, improve customer experiences, and help satellite providers reach more customers through unified platform. The company said the initiative will help the U.S. extend its global leadership in wireless communications technology, while also enabling competition and fostering innovation and growth. The venture remains subject to negotiating definitive agreements and closing conditions, they said. Existing carrier satellite agreements would remain in place under the agreement, and each company would be able to continue its own connectivity efforts independently, they said. Mansion, a 100-year-old home in Los Angeles suburbs. The owner spent years restoring the Spanish colonial revival using blueprints from original owners. Brad and Vicki Schwartz had long wanted to host a large birthday bash, but not for a relative, friend, or even themselves. They wanted to celebrate their Spanish colonial revival, which turned 100 this year. When we bought the home 27 years ago, Vicki came up with the idea, and I readily agreed, says Brad, 66. The couple bought the property in 2009 for around $2.55 million. In the Los Angeles suburb of La Cafiata, Flint Ridge, the circa 1926 property became the area's first designated historic home in 2012, according to the Schwartzes. For the party, the guest list included former mayors, the current mayor, and former and current city council members. The couple are both attorneys and community leaders. Vicki founded the La Canada Flint Ridge Sister Cities Association and serves on the board of the Pasadena Symphony, while Brad previously served as a trustee for the La Canedia Flint Ridge Educational Foundation and is a member of the city's Investment and Financing Advisory Committee. The Schwartzes spent years restoring the house using blueprints obtained from descendants of the family that built it. They declined to say how much they spent on the restoration. Can't miss features. Many of the finishes are original, the couple says. In the living room, there are 11 original ceiling beams, says Vicki, 67. In the dining room, the pair removed layers of dirt from the box beam ceiling, revealing hand-painted images. The Schwartzes rebuilt the roof and restored the original roofline and tiles. We took those tiles off one at a time, reinforced the whole roof, and then put them back on, says Vicki. Reason for selling? The two are looking to downsize now that they are empty nesters. They plan to stay in the area. The couple will miss the home's architecture. We don't notice it on a day-to-day basis, Brad said. Then a friend points something out, and we take a closer look and rediscover some features and architectural integrity and appreciate all over again. Market snapshot. La Canada Flint Ridge is an upscale LA suburb that is often considered a hidden gem, according to listing agent Kathy Silementizian with Caldwell Banker Realty. La Canada Flint Ridge, the city's most expensive home, sold for $14 million in 2023. CDC walks a fine line in response to hantavirus. Officials host calls, move staff, but don't want to replicate COVID-era actions. The Trump administration's top health officials are walking a tightrope on hantavirus, trying to avoid public panic and a repeat of what they view as pandemic-era missteps while escalating the federal response to the threat. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have increased the number of staff assigned to the effort from 3 late last week to around 100 as of Wednesday, according to internal CDC data viewed by the Wall Street Journal. The group working on hantavirus includes staffers from the agency's National Center for Emergency and Zoonotic Infection Diseases, according to CDC employees. That center, which includes a division that conducts surveillance research and lab diagnostics for deadly viruses, saw retirements and departures of senior leaders over the last year, but it didn't face as drastic cuts as other areas of the agency under President Trump. And before we go on, we'd like to tell you you're listening to a reading of the articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. And continuing on, the surge in personnel reflects mounting urgency inside the administration to contain a rare hantavirus outbreak aboard the cruise ship MV Honduras after it spread further, but lingering skepticism among some top health officials about strict COVID-19 pandemic measures has made the administration cautious about imposing quarantines or other restrictions for a virus known to be less transmissible but more deadly than COVID, according to people familiar with the matter. Several leaders now running the country's top health agencies, including acting CDC Director Jay Bhattacharya, have publicly criticized COVID-era restrictions and are now working to explain the level of threat posed by hantavirus. Federal officials, including some at the CDC, want to avoid stirring up fear or anxiety among the American public, according to some employees, a traditional approach in government public health messaging. Bhattacharya is leading the CDC's response to the outbreak inside the Department of Health and Human Services. This is not a novel virus. This is a known virus, Dr. David Fitter, incident manager for the CDC's hantavirus response, said in a call with reporters Wednesday. We've seen this in the United States before, and we know how to respond to it. Former CDC employees and infectious disease specialists characterized the agency's early response to this outbreak as languid compared to how the agency would typically run. They said in a formal notice to alert its network of public health officials and laboratories about urgent public health issues, which was published Friday, should have been published sooner. Some official statements from HHS have confused CDC employees. HHS posted on X that one American passenger tested mildly PCR positive for the Andes variant, a phrase that perplexed CDC employees and public health officials. HHS's post on X has since been appended with a community note explaining there is no such thing as a testing mildly PCR positive. At the White House, discussion about the latest developments with hantavirus occurs several times a day, according to a person familiar with the matter. Homeland Security Advisor Stephen Miller's team has taken the leading role in hantavirus meetings, people familiar with the matter said. The U.S. has coordinated with global health officials to contain the virus that has killed 3 people and sickened several others after an outbreak on the cruise ship. A total of 18 passengers returned to the U.S. on Monday. American officials have said the risk to the general public remains low. Around a dozen CDC employees are in Nebraska monitoring the American passengers at a specialized quarantine facility and determining the next steps, according to staffers John Knox, a top HHS official and former firefighter, leads frequent HHS calls on the virus, as well as a team from the Administration for Strategic Preparedness and Response, the agency in charge of the Nebraska facility. 15 of the passengers were taken to the quarantine facility housed at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha, while one passenger who tested positive for hantavirus was placed in a nearby biocontainment unit. A couple traveling together aboard the ship were taken to Atlanta after one of them began experiencing symptoms. HHS said that person has since tested negative. While hantavirus doesn't typically spread between humans, what is known as the Andes strain is the exception. According to the CDC, the strain has shown limited evidence of human-to-human transmission, and it's primarily found in Chile and Argentina. While the Andes variant is rare, scientists generally believe infected people need to have close contact with others for the only hantavirus variant capable of transmitting between humans to spread. World burns through its oil safely, let's go back. World burns through oil's safety net at a record pace. An unappreciated surplus of crude oil sloshing around storage tanks and aboard ships cushioned the global economy when the Persian Gulf closed 2.5 months ago. That excess supply is now dwindling at a record pace, with oil executives and analysts predicting that a harsh reckoning is set to upend the relative calm in energy markets. Acute shortages of key fuels and soaring prices could emerge within weeks if the Strait of Hormuz remains shut. The drawdown in private storage and government strategic reserves, along with the fall in demand because of the higher prices, has bought time and prevented oil prices from exploding, but has left little margin for error in the months ahead. You can only decrease consumption so much, and when the inventories run out, they're going to run out, said Ellen Wald, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. At some point, the market is going to collide, and prices are going to shoot up. Global oil inventories, which include onshore tanks and oil floating on tankers at sea, and are a measure of the slack in energy markets, have fallen at a record pace since the start of the war. They plunged by 250 million barrels over March and April, according to the International Energy Agency, a Paris-based club of energy-consuming nations. This is equal to around 2.5 days of global use. The runway to avoid critical levels, known as tank bottoms in industry parlance, is vanishing rapidly. In a report titled The Illusion of Plenty, J.P. Morgan Chase estimated that if the strait remains blocked, stockpiles in a group of wealthy nations could plunge to operational stress levels in early June and to system-straining operational floor level by September. The bank said it doesn't expect inventories to actually reach those levels because history suggests demand would be curtailed first. The implications of an oil supply shortage are vast. Prices at the gas pumps are touching their highest levels in years in the U.S. and could shoot higher when stocks run low. Airlines are reorganizing flights to adapt to potential shortages of jet fuel. Central bank decisions over whether to raise interest rates will depend in large part on whether oil markets remain well supplied. The chief executive of Saudi Aramco, Saudi Arabia's state-owned oil company, said this week that global stockpiles for refined products such as gasoline and jet fuel could reach critically low levels ahead of a summer driving and travel season. The oil market's saving grace was the remarkable surplus it carried into the conflict, which cushioned the blow far better than some analysts predicted when the Strait of Hormuz first closed. Iran and Russia had millions of barrels of oil floating at sea, looking for buyers. U.S. Treasury waivers on sanctions of Russian oil unleashed the gusher of supply onto the market. Another major part of the emergency backstop is coming from the U.S. and other Western governments. The 32 member nations of the IEA deployed roughly 164 million barrels through May 8th, helping to offset the 10 million barrels a day lost in the Gulf. The IEA expects its members to release an additional 210 million barrels of government stocks through the end of July. Releasing the stocks isn't the same as replacing supply. It shifts the shortage problem into the future, when governments and companies will eventually have to rebuild depleted reserves. The IEA estimates that replenishing the cumulative deficit, including strategic reserves, would require roughly an extra 1 million barrels a day of supply for 3 years. As a result of the inventory depletion, U.S. stocks of diesel are likely to fall below 100 million barrels, the lowest level since 2003, by the end of May, according to consulting firm Eurasia Group. Even sharper declines are hitting Asia, the region's most reliant on Persian Gulf exports before the war. Supply is unlikely to recover in the next few weeks or next few months, even if the strait opens tomorrow, said Thomas Vargo, analyst of London-based oil broker PVM. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the Friday, May 15th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. and Friday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Sally Herzog. Thank you so much for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the Buffalo Criterion. At 8 o'clock, we have the New York Times. And at 9 o'clock, we have Discover Magazine. Stay with us for these readings and more. The following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability, which